What you are about to hear is not a book about getting rich. It is not a book about budgeting, investing, or the 10 habits of financially successful people. What you are about to experience is something far rarer and, for many of us, far more unsettling, a deep, honest, sometimes uncomfortable examination of our relationship with money. Not the money in our wallets or our bank accounts, but the money in our minds, the money in our fears, the money woven into how we measure ourselves, how we love, how we hide, and how we live. The Soul of Money was written by Lynne Twist, a woman who has spent more than 4 decades working at the extremes of human experience. She has sat with the world's wealthiest donors in New York penthouses and with mothers watching their children starve in Bangladesh. She has walked with indigenous elders in the Amazon and stood in boardrooms on Wall Street. And through all of it, she noticed something extraordinary. Whether people had everything or almost nothing, they were governed by the same invisible force, a story they told themselves about money. And that story, almost universally, was a story of scarcity. This summary will walk you through the entire arc of Lynne Twist's transformative book. We will explore where our ideas about money come from. We will examine the 3 toxic myths that govern almost every financial decision we make. We will discover what Twist calls sufficiency, not as a compromise or a consolation prize, but as a profound and powerful state of being. And we will follow Twist through some of the most remarkable human encounters ever documented in a book about personal finance. By the end of this journey, you may not have more money, but you will have a completely different relationship with the money you have. And according to Lynne Twist, that changes everything. Let us begin. Part 1. Love, Lies, and a Great Awakening. Chapter 1. Money and Me, Money and Us. Picture a ring of iron around your wrist. You did not choose it, you were born with it. Or perhaps it appeared so gradually you never noticed it arriving. It does not hurt exactly, but it controls you. It shapes every movement, every decision, every dream. You pull toward things and the ring tightens. You try to rest and the ring reminds you it is there. That iron ring, Lynne Twist tells us, is money. Not money itself, the paper, the coin, the digital number, but what money means to us. The weight we have given it. The authority we have surrendered to it. The way our entire emotional landscape shifts depending on whether we feel we have enough of it, not enough of it, or more than we deserve. Twist opens her book by confessing something most financial authors would never admit. She too was captured by this ring. She and her husband Bill were living the American dream in the 1970s. A beautiful home, growing careers, children, comfort. They were accumulating, as you do, always slightly more than before, always slightly less than they felt they needed. The background noise of their lives was a quiet, persistent hum of not quite enough. Then something happened that cracked her world open. She attended a lecture by Werner Erhard, the founder of a transformational organization, who spoke about world hunger with a directness and urgency she had never encountered. He said something like this: "The fact that people are dying of hunger in a world that produces more than enough food to feed everyone is not a logistical problem. It is not a resource problem. It is a human problem. It is a problem of our collective will, and it can be solved in our lifetimes if we choose to solve it." Lynne Twist sat in that auditorium and felt something shift in her chest. She had spent her whole life, like most of us, looking inward toward her family, her comfort, her ambitions. In that moment, she began looking outward. She joined the Hunger Project and within a few years had given over her professional life to it. She would spend decades raising funds, ultimately over $150 million, to fight hunger across Africa, Asia, and Latin America. But the real education was not in the fundraising. It was in what the fundraising taught her about people's relationship with money. Twist observed a paradox again and again. People who gave money to causes they deeply believed in felt lighter, more alive, more purposeful than before. And people who hoarded money, who never let it move, who always managed to have reasons why now was not the time to give, these people, regardless of how much they had, felt anxious, isolated, and somehow always behind. She began to understand something. Money, she realized, is not simply a unit of exchange. It is a carrier of energy. It moves through our lives the way water moves through a landscape, carving channels, nourishing some things and starving others, reflecting back the intentions of whoever holds and directs it. And the question that began to consume her was this: what is the energy we are putting into our money, and what is it doing to our souls? Chapter 2. Into India, Heart of Hunger, Soul of Money. The first time Lynne Twist traveled to India as part of her work with the Hunger Project, she was not prepared for what she found. She landed in a country of staggering beauty and staggering suffering simultaneously occupying the same space. On the banks of the Ganges River, she saw what she first took to be flower rafts, elaborate, gorgeous formations floating on the sacred water. Then she realized they were funeral pyres, death and beauty, indistinguishable from a distance. India had, at the time, more people living in hunger than any other nation on earth, over 300 million people for whom the question of enough food to survive was not philosophical but daily and desperate. And yet, India also had some of the most extraordinary spiritual wealth in the world, a culture that had wrestled deeply with questions of meaning, purpose, and the nature of the self. It was in India that Twist met Ramkrishna Bajaj, a man sometimes called Gandhi's fifth son, a close associate of the Mahatma who had carried the torch of Gandhi's vision into the modern era. Bajaj became an unexpected mentor. He walked Twist through the extremes of Indian society, the sprawling slums and the palatial homes of the ultra-wealthy. He taught her something she would carry for the rest of her life. Poverty is not simply the absence of money, and wealth is not simply the presence of it. Poverty in its deepest form is a condition of the spirit, a belief that one is without power, without agency, without worth. And wealth in its truest form is a condition of the spirit as well, a recognition of one's inherent dignity, connection, and capacity to contribute. Bajaj showed her communities in India that had almost nothing by Western standards: no running water, no electricity, no guaranteed food supply, and yet were characterized by a vitality, a laughter, a solidarity that struck Twist as more genuinely wealthy than many of the prosperous neighborhoods she knew back home. This was her first real encounter with what she would later name sufficiency. Not as a concept yet, but as a live, breathing reality. These people were not pretending to be happy despite having less. They were not in denial about their hardships, but they had a relationship with what they had that was fundamentally different from the relationship Twist had been raised with. They experienced their lives as enough, and in that enoughness, they were free. Twist came back from India changed. The rest of the book is, in many ways, her effort to understand and transmit what she glimpsed there. Part 2. The Toxic Myths of Scarcity. Chapter 3. The Lie of Scarcity, 3 Toxic Myths. Here we arrive at what may be the most intellectually important section of the entire book. Lynne Twist identifies 3 myths, she calls them toxic myths, that collectively create what she names the scarcity mind. These myths are so pervasive, so deeply embedded in Western culture, that most of us have never once questioned them. They feel like facts. They feel like physics. They feel as obvious and immovable as gravity. They are not. They are stories, and like all stories, they can be examined, questioned, and if we choose, replaced. Toxic myth number 1, there's not enough. This is the foundation of the scarcity mind, the bedrock, the story that whispers and sometimes shouts from the moment we wake up to the moment we fall asleep. There's not enough time. There's not enough money. There's not enough love. There's not enough recognition. There's not enough security. There's not enough of whatever it is we most desperately need in this particular moment of our lives. Twist says this story is so universal, so deeply assumed, that we rarely even notice we are running it. It operates below the level of conscious thought. It shapes our behavior the way the operating system of a computer shapes every program running on it. Invisibly, constantly, fundamentally. And the consequences are devastating. When we believe there is not enough, we hoard. We compete rather than cooperate. We make decisions from fear rather than from love. We treat other people as threats to our supply rather than as partners in shared abundance. We never fully relax because relaxing feels dangerous, like taking our eye off something that might disappear. In our personal lives, this manifests as financial anxiety, overwork, the inability to enjoy what we have because we are always calculating what we might lose. In our collective lives, it manifests as the hoarding of resources by a small number of people while billions lack basic necessities, not because there isn't enough, but because we have structured our world around the belief that there isn't. Here is the devastating irony that Twist surfaces. The world currently produces enough food to feed every human being on the planet. The famines and food crises we witness are not, at their root, caused by insufficient food production. They are caused by distribution, politics, economics, by human choices shaped by the belief that there is not enough to go around. The not enough story is not just personally damaging. It is, Twist argues, the story that underlies the most serious crises facing humanity. Toxic myth number 2, more is better. If the first myth tells us there is not enough, the second myth tells us what we should do about it: get more, accumulate more, be more, have more, achieve more. This myth is so thoroughly embedded in modern consumer culture that it has become almost indistinguishable from progress itself. Economic growth, more revenue, more followers, more square footage, more credentials, more experiences, more. Now, Twist is not arguing against growth or achievement. She is not making a case for voluntary poverty or enforced minimalism. What she is pointing to is something subtler and more troubling: the way more is better functions as an unconscious compulsion rather than a conscious choice. Most of us, if we are honest, cannot identify the point at which we would have enough money to feel secure, enough recognition to feel valued, enough success to feel worthy, because the story of more is better always moves the goalpost. The moment we arrive at what we thought would be enough, the horizon shifts and we are already not enough again. Twist calls this the hedonic treadmill in modern psychological terms, though she frames it in more personal and spiritual language. She describes working with extraordinarily wealthy donors, people with more money than most of us can meaningfully imagine, who still lived in a state of financial anxiety, constantly worried about losing what they had, constantly comparing themselves to people who had more, never arriving at a place of genuine ease. The tragedy of the more is better myth is not that it fails to deliver what it promises. It is that it actively prevents us from recognizing and appreciating what we already have. When your eyes are always on what you don't yet possess, you become blind to what is already in your hands. Toxic myth number 3, that's just the way it is. This is perhaps the most insidious of the 3 myths, because it masquerades as realism. The first 2 myths are about wanting. This third myth is about resignation. It says, yes, the world is unfair. Yes, some people have too much and others have too little. Yes, this is how things have always been and probably always will be, but that's just reality. That's human nature. That's the way it is. When we believe this myth, we stop asking whether things could be different. We stop imagining alternative possibilities. We become passive participants in systems that we could, if we believed differently, actively shape and change. Twist encountered this myth constantly in her fundraising work. She would share stories of communities transformed by access to clean water, or women lifted out of poverty by microlending, or entire regions where hunger had been eliminated through agricultural education and community organizing. And the response often was a kind of polite skepticism. That's wonderful, but what can one person really do? These are ancient problems. Surely we can't change them. She argues that this belief, that's just the way it is not realism. It is a story told by people who have made peace with injustice because challenging it feels too costly or too hopeless. And it functions as a self-fulfilling prophecy. If enough of us believe the problems cannot be solved, we will invest neither the energy nor the resources to solve them. And they will persist, confirming our belief. Together, these three myths create a closed loop. There is not enough. Therefore, I must get more. And even if I do get more, nothing fundamental will change. This loop, Twist argues, is the prison of the scarcity mind. And she has a key to unlock it. Part 3. The Radical Truth of Sufficiency. Chapter 4. Sufficiency, the Radical Alternative. If scarcity is the disease, sufficiency is the cure. But Twist is very careful, almost insistent, about what sufficiency is not. Sufficiency is not having enough. It is not a fixed amount. It is not a financial threshold you cross. It is not a lifestyle of deprivation where you learn to want less and settle for less and be grateful for less. Sufficiency, in Twist's framework, is a way of being, a quality of attention, a recognition that enough is not an amount, it is a relationship. It is the experience of meeting what is real and present and true in this moment, without the constant overlay of, but it should be more. She offers an analogy that is worth dwelling with. Imagine standing by a stream. The stream is flowing. Water passes through your hands. You could stand there and mourn that you can't hold all the water, that the stream is infinite and you are finite, that the water is constantly leaving. You could feel anxious about the water you don't have, the water that got away, the water somewhere downstream that others might be getting more of. Or you could simply feel the water flowing through your hands and recognize, this is enough. This moment of cool water and moving life in connection to something larger, this is sufficient. Money, Twist says, is like water. It is meant to flow. It carries life when it moves. When we dam it up, when we hoard it out of fear, when we clutch it and control it and refuse to let it move, it stagnates. It becomes a prison rather than a river. Sufficiency is the recognition that your life right now contains what you need to do what matters. Not everything you want, not everything you might someday need, but what you need now to live with integrity and purpose and love. This is not passive. It is not resignation. In fact, Twist argues that the sufficiency mindset unleashes an energy that the scarcity mindset never can, because it frees us from the exhausting, futile project of chasing something we can never catch, and lets us direct our attention and resources toward what actually matters. Chapter 5. Money is like water. This chapter contains one of the most memorable stories in the book, and it is worth telling in full. Lynne Twist was attending a fundraising event in New York City, one of those gatherings where well-dressed people write checks in a ballroom and feel virtuous about it. She had been working hard all evening, meeting donors, making her asks, carrying the weight of the organization's needs. Late in the evening, a small elderly woman made her way through the crowd to where Twist was standing. The woman's name was Gertrude. She was from Harlem. She was not wealthy by any conventional measure. She pressed a small envelope into Twist's hands and said something like, "I want you to have this. I've been saving it." Inside the envelope was $50, in cash, carefully folded. $50 that Gertrude had saved, likely over many months, from a pension or Social Security check that was already stretched thin. Twist felt overwhelmed. She started to protest, to say that this was too much, that Gertrude should keep it, that the organization didn't need. Gertrude stopped her. "Don't you take this away from me," she said. "This is mine to give. I've been waiting to give this. When I give this, I become part of something bigger than my little life. Don't rob me of that." Twist stood there, holding the envelope, and felt something shift permanently in her understanding of money and generosity. Gertrude was not giving out of excess. She was giving out of a recognition of sufficiency, a conviction that what she had was enough to matter, that her contribution was real, that she belonged to the larger effort of human care for human beings. And in that belonging, She was not diminished by her small means. She was enlarged by her clear intention. Compare this to another story Twist tells in this chapter, of a wealthy donor she pursued for years, a man with genuine resources and genuine concern about world hunger, who could never quite bring himself to give. There was always a reason to wait, always a market condition to monitor, a quarter to evaluate, a conversation to have first. He died before he made the gift he had always intended to make. Two people, vastly different circumstances. One experienced money as a conduit for purpose and lived in the fullness of that purpose. The other experienced money as a source of anxiety and control and lived, despite enormous wealth, in a kind of spiritual poverty. The difference was not in the amounts. The difference was in the intention, and that intention is what Twist means by the soul of money. Money carries the soul we give it. When we use it consciously, with intention aligned to our values, it becomes an expression of who we are. When we use it unconsciously, driven by fear or habit or social pressure, it becomes a reflection of the stories we haven't examined. Part 4. The World Stage, Stories from the Edges of Poverty and Wealth. Chapter 6. The High-Stakes World of Fundraising. For most of us, money conversations are uncomfortable. We talk around money. We make assumptions about money. We feel shame about money, whether we have too little or sometimes too much. We rarely look at it directly, honestly, with clear eyes. Lynne Twist spent decades having money conversations that most people would find terrifying. She sat across from some of the wealthiest individuals in the world and asked them to give millions of dollars to help people they would never meet, in places they would never visit, for reasons that had nothing to do with their personal financial interests. What she discovered in those conversations is both illuminating and, in some ways, deeply unsettling. Many wealthy people, she found, were carrying an enormous burden around their money. They worried about whether people liked them for themselves or for their resources. They worried that their children would be spoiled or endangered by their inheritance. They worried that no matter how much they gave, it would never be enough to justify the gap between their comfort and the world's suffering. They worried that their wealth made them complicit in a system that produced the very poverty they were now being asked to alleviate. These were not simple, greedy people sitting on piles of gold and refusing to share. They were complex human beings who had accumulated significant resources and did not have a framework for relating to those resources that felt coherent, ethical, or at peace. Twist became, over the years, something like a spiritual guide for donors as much as a fundraiser. She helped people find the story about their wealth that allowed them to use it with intention and freedom, rather than guilt and anxiety. One of the central practices she developed was what she calls honest conversation about money. Not the transactional conversations most of us have, about amounts and terms and tax implications, but genuine conversations about what money means to us, what we fear, what we hope, what we want our money to say about who we are. These conversations, she found, were among the most intimate and revealing she ever had, more so, often, than conversations about love or death or faith, because money, in our culture, has become the thing we most closely associate with our worth. And when you ask someone to honestly examine their relationship with money, you are asking them to honestly examine how they see themselves. This is uncomfortable, but it is also transformative. Chapter 7. Encounters at the Extremes. Throughout the book, Twist takes us to places most of us will never go and introduces us to people we would never otherwise meet. These are not abstract characters in parables. They are real men and women whose lives embody the principles she is teaching. Let us pause here to hear a few of their stories. In Bangladesh, Twist encountered a village of women who had been given small loans, microloans, as they are now called, through a pioneering program designed to help impoverished women start small businesses. The conventional wisdom at the time was that poor women were too uneducated, too constrained by culture, too lacking in resources to be creditworthy. The loan program challenged this assumption. What Twist found was not merely economic transformation, though that was real. What she found was a change in the women's experience of themselves. They were no longer objects of charity. They were agents of their own economic lives. They had accountability, yes. The loans had to be repaid, but accountability within a community of mutual support. The women in these lending circles watched out for each other. When one woman struggled, the others helped. When one succeeded, the others celebrated. This, Twist argues, is what sufficiency looks like in practice. Not each person scraping along in isolation, competing for a fixed pool of resources, but communities recognizing that their resources, when pooled and directed with intention, are sufficient for the needs they collectively face. In the Amazon, Twist spent time with indigenous Achuar people, a community living in one of the most biodiverse and threatened ecosystems on the planet. The Achuar had almost nothing by the measures Western economists use to gauge development. They had no electricity, no paved roads, no formal economy, and yet their relationship with their land, with each other, and with the future was characterized by a richness that Twist found deeply instructive. The Achuar had a concept that roughly translates as, "We take what we need and we tend to what remains." This is sufficiency in ecological form, not growth for its own sake, not extraction beyond need, but a dynamic, conscious relationship with resources understood as a gift to be stewarded, not a supply to be depleted. Twist came away from these encounters with the conviction that the communities she was meant to be helping were, in some of the most important ways, teaching her. In New York, she sat with some of the country's wealthiest families. She describes an event she attended at the home of an extraordinarily successful couple, a home of such opulence that it registered almost as satire. And yet the hosts, she noticed, were not at ease. They circulated through their own abundance with a kind of restlessness, monitoring their guests, managing appearances, working even at a party. The money was everywhere in that room, and something essential was not. Contrast this with a story she tells of a woman, a middle-class teacher in the Midwest, who, upon hearing about the Hunger Project, decided to give $1 a day to help feed children. Not a fortune, not a transformative gift by any financial measure, but she spoke about this commitment with a joy, a sense of connection to something larger than herself, that Twist recognized as precisely the wealth the couple in the New York penthouse was searching for. The teacher's life was organized around a conviction that what she had was sufficient to matter. And mattering, it turns out, is its own form of wealth. Part 5. The Practice of Sufficiency, 3 Principles. Chapter 8. Appreciating What You Have. Twist now moves from the philosophical to the practical. She is not content simply to diagnose our relationship with money. She wants to offer a path forward, and she organizes that path around 3 interconnected principles. The first principle is this: appreciate what you have. This sounds, on first hearing, like something from a refrigerator magnet. It sounds like the kind of advice that is easy to give and impossible to apply when you are genuinely struggling, when there are real bills to pay and real needs unmet. But Twist means something more radical than count your blessings. She is pointing to a shift in the fundamental orientation of attention. Most of us, most of the time, have our attention organized around what is missing. Our minds are remarkably adept at inventorying deficits, what we don't have, what we haven't achieved, what we've lost or never found. This is not a personal failing. It is, in part, a product of evolution. Brains that noticed what was wrong, what was threatening, what was absent were brains that survived. But we are no longer in an environment where this vigilance serves us. In most of our lives, the immediate threats that shape the anxious brain are not present. What is present, what is real and available and sufficient in this moment, goes largely unnoticed because our attention is organized elsewhere. Appreciation, in Twist's sense, is a practice of redirecting attention, not denying difficulty, not pretending problems don't exist, but deliberately, intentionally, regularly placing your attention on what is actually present and real and good. She suggests a practice. At the end of each day, ask yourself not what did I accomplish, or what did I fail to do, but rather, what was present in my life today that I didn't fully notice? What relationships, what moments, what small experiences of beauty or meaning or connection passed by while your attention was elsewhere? Over time, this practice changes the texture of lived experience. The baseline shifts. What felt like not enough begins to feel, gradually, like a sufficiency. Not because more has arrived, but because what was always there becomes visible. Chapter 9, Telling the Truth. The second principle is more demanding. Tell the truth. In particular, tell the truth about money, which most of us never do. We lie about money constantly. We lie about how much we have. We lie about how much we spend. We lie about what we can afford and what we can't. We lie about our financial anxieties to protect our image. We lie about our financial success to avoid judgment. We make financial decisions based on what we think we should want rather than what we actually value. We say yes to things we can't afford and no to things that matter deeply to us, and we never examine the stories driving these choices. Twist argues that honest money conversations with ourselves and with the people we love and work with are among the most powerful tools available for transforming our relationship with money. She is not suggesting you post your bank statements on social media. She is suggesting that in the relationships that matter most, with a spouse or partner, with close friends, with yourself in moments of genuine reflection, you examine the stories you tell about money and whether those stories are actually true. Are you telling yourself you can't afford to give because you genuinely lack the resources, or because you've never examined whether your lifestyle could absorb a small shift? Are you spending money in ways that reflect what you actually value, or in ways that perform the identity you think others expect of you? Are you staying in a financial arrangement, a job, a spending pattern, a relationship with debt, because it serves your real needs, or because challenging it feels too frightening? These questions are uncomfortable. The discomfort, Twist says, is the point. The places where we are most defended around money are the places where the most important truth-telling lives. She tells the story of a conversation she had with her own family, with her husband and children, in which they sat down and honestly named, for perhaps the first time, what they each actually valued and what their money was and wasn't reflecting about those values. It was not an easy conversation. It surfaced tensions, revealed assumptions, required vulnerability. And it changed, permanently and for the better, how the family related both to each other and to their financial life. Chapter 10, Directing Your Money Where It Matters. The third principle completes the set. Direct your money toward what matters most. This is, in one sense, the most practical instruction in the book. But Twist invests it with a depth that takes it far beyond simple budgeting advice. She is saying, your money is a vote. Every dollar you spend, save, give, or withhold is an expression of what you value. Every financial choice you make is a statement about who you are and what you believe the world should look like. And most of us are making those choices unconsciously, shaped by habit, by marketing, by social pressure, by fear, rather than with genuine intention. To direct your money where it matters is to bring consciousness to this process. It is to ask, regularly and honestly, does where my money goes reflect what I actually care about? Does my financial life look like the life of someone with my values? For many of us, the honest answer will be, not really. We spend money on things we don't really want to impress people, we don't really admire, and fill time we could spend on things that actually matter to us. This is not a moral failure. It is simply what happens when we are operating on unconscious autopilot in a culture expertly designed to exploit our insecurities and exploit the scarcity mind. Twist suggests a clarifying exercise. Write down the 5 things you most deeply value, not what you think you should value, but what genuinely matters to you at the level of your soul. Then look at your financial life and ask, does this reflect those 5 things? Is your time and money flowing toward what you named? Where there is alignment, where your money is moving in the direction of what you actually care about, you will feel a particular quality of rightness, a sense that your life is coherent, that you are living in integrity with yourself. Where there is misalignment, where your money is flowing away from your real values and toward things that don't actually matter to you, you will feel a kind of low-grade dissatisfaction, even in the presence of apparent success. Closing that gap between where your money goes and what you actually value is, Twist argues, one of the most powerful and underutilized paths to genuine well-being available to us. Part 6. The Flow of Money, Giving as a Way of Being. Chapter 11. The Transforming Power of Giving. We come now to the chapter at the heart of the book's moral vision. Lynne Twist believes in giving, not as a tax strategy, not as social obligation, not as a way of buying virtue, but as an expression of what she calls our most essential human capacity, the recognition that we belong to each other, that our well-being is bound up with the well-being of others, and that money, when directed from this recognition, carries a power beyond anything it can accomplish when hoarded out of fear. She tells story after story of people who gave in ways that defied conventional financial logic and found, on the other side of the gift, something they had been searching for their entire lives. There is the story of a man with serious financial constraints who decided, after hearing Twist speak, to give $100 he technically could not afford. He wrote the check in a state of genuine intention, not performance, not obligation, but a clear and conscious act of saying, "I believe this matters, and I put my resources behind what I believe." He described the experience afterward as one of the most freeing acts of his life, not because the gift was large, but because in making it, he discovered that he was the kind of person who could give, that he was not permanently defined by his constraints, that he had, even in a moment of genuine financial struggle, the capacity to be generous. There is the story of a wealthy woman who had given large amounts to many causes, but always with a quality of management and control, always with conditions, always with monitoring, always with a slight undertone of the gift as leverage. When Twist helped her examine this pattern, the woman recognized that she was giving from fear, fear of being taken advantage of, fear of losing control, fear that the gift wouldn't be used properly, rather than from genuine generosity. She described the shift, when she learned to give with trust and openness rather than control, as transformative not just for the recipients of her gifts but for herself. Giving in Twist's framework is not primarily about the receiver. It is also perhaps primarily about the giver. When we give from genuine intention and authentic values, we declare something about who we are. We step into our own power as agents of our deepest beliefs. We break the closed loop of the scarcity mind, which says, "I must keep everything I have because there might not be enough," and experience, often for the first time, the freedom of living from sufficiency. She does not romanticize giving or suggest it is always comfortable. Real giving requires examining what we are actually doing, what story is behind the gift, what we hope to get from it, what we fear in its absence. But when we work through that examination and arrive at genuine, intentional generosity, something shifts. We become, she says, more fully ourselves. Chapter 12. Collaboration and the Possibility of Enough. Twist moves in this chapter from individual practice to collective possibility. One of the most profound consequences of the scarcity mind is that it makes collaboration feel dangerous. If there is not enough, then your gain is my loss. Your success is a threat to my supply. This zero-sum thinking pervades not just financial markets but political systems, international relations, organizational cultures, and personal relationships. But Twist has seen what happens when people shift from competition, rooted in scarcity, to collaboration rooted in sufficiency. And it is remarkable. She tells the story of 7 people from Sylhet, a region in Bangladesh, who came together with a shared conviction that their community's problems were solvable with the resources they collectively had. They were not wealthy by any external measure. They had no special access to funding or technology or political power. What they had was each other, and a commitment to look at their situation from the lens of sufficiency rather than scarcity. What happened over the following years was extraordinary. They organized community labor to reclaim land that had been neglected and considered barren. They established systems for sharing tools, knowledge, and child care. They created markets for their products and lobbied collectively for infrastructure that no individual among them could have secured alone. They transformed their region, not by importing resources from outside, but by directing the resources they already had with intention and coordination. This is not a fairy tale. It did not happen without struggle, conflict, and setback, but it happened. And it happened because a small group of people decided to believe something different about what was possible. Twist sees this story as a template for everything from community development to corporate strategy to global governance. The question is never whether we have enough. The question is whether we can organize what we have around a shared intention that is larger than any individual's fear. Part 7, Legacy, What Do We Leave Behind? Chapter 13, The Stewardship of Wealth. As the book moves toward its conclusion, Twist turns our attention forward, to the question of what we are building with our financial lives and what we will leave behind. She introduces the concept of stewardship as an alternative to the concept of ownership. In the ownership model, which is the default model of Western financial life, money and property belong to us. We have earned it, accumulated it, and we can do with it as we please. In the stewardship model, we hold our resources temporarily. We have been entrusted with them by our circumstances, our timing, our talents, our luck. And the question is not what we get to do with our resources, but what we are responsible for doing with them. This is not a message of guilt or obligation. Twist is careful to distinguish genuine stewardship from the performance of virtue. She is not asking us to give away everything and live in voluntary poverty. She is asking us to hold our resources with a different quality of attention, to recognize that we are not just private individuals managing personal accounts, but participants in a larger human story, and that what we do with what we have matters far beyond our own lifetimes. She points to people throughout history who understood this, not just the famous philanthropists whose names are on buildings, but ordinary people who directed the resources of their lives, their time, their relationships, their money, their creativity towards something that outlasted them. A teacher who gave everything to her students and lived to see those students change their communities. A small business owner who shared profits with employees, who shared those profits with their families, who built schools in their communities. A grandmother who saved $50 at a time, year after year, and whose gifts, accumulated, helped feed children she would never meet. These are people who experienced their resources as a current they were part of, not a pool they owned, and directed that current toward life. Chapter 14, A New Dream for Money and the World. The final movement of this book is, in some ways, its most ambitious. Twist is asking us to imagine a different kind of world, not a utopia, not a world without scarcity or suffering or difficulty, but a world in which the foundational stories we tell about resources, about wealth, about what it means to have enough, are different from the stories we tell now. She argues that the dream currently driving our collective economic life, the dream of unlimited growth, unlimited accumulation, unlimited extraction, is not only psychologically and spiritually damaging. It is, increasingly, visibly unsustainable. We are living beyond the means of the planet that supports us. We are consuming resources that took millions of years to accumulate. We are treating the natural world as a supply depot rather than a living system of which we are a part. The shift she is calling for is not merely personal, it is civilizational. She points to indigenous wisdom traditions, the Achuar in the Amazon, the communities she encountered in India and Bangladesh and Africa, as offering something crucial to this shift. not because we should romanticize or uncritically adopt other cultures' practices, but because these traditions have, in many cases, maintained relationships with resources and with the natural world that are organized around sufficiency rather than scarcity, around stewardship rather than extraction, around belonging rather than ownership. The world is not running out of resources. The world is running out of the wisdom to use those resources with integrity. And Twist believes, and this is the most hopeful claim in the entire book, that the wisdom is not lost. It is available. It is in the stories people like Gertrude tell with $50 and a lifetime of saving. It is in the 7 people from Sylhet who believed their community could transform itself. It is in the indigenous elders who have tended to the land for 1,000 years. It is in each of us, beneath the story of scarcity, waiting to be recognized. Conclusion: the soul of your money. We have traveled far in these hours together. We have followed Lynne Twist from the comfortable materialism of her early life into the hunger camps of India and Bangladesh, through the boardrooms of America's wealthiest donors and the villages of its poorest communities, and back, always back, to a simple but radical proposition. Your relationship with money is your relationship with yourself. The stories you tell about what you have and what you don't have, about what you deserve and what others deserve, about what is possible and what is inevitable, these are not descriptions of reality. They are the architecture of reality, the framework through which you build your life and relate to everyone in it. The 3 toxic myths, there is not enough, more is better, and that's just the way it is, are not truths. They are stories, and they are stories that are costing us, individually and collectively, an extraordinary price. The alternative Twist offers sufficiency, honest attention, intentional giving, conscious stewardship, is not passive, and it is not easy. It requires a willingness to look clearly at how we actually live our financial lives and to ask whether that living reflects who we actually want to be. But she has seen, over 50 years and across 6 continents, what happens when people make this shift. She has watched individuals transform their relationship with their own resources and find a freedom and aliveness they had spent their whole lives pursuing through accumulation. She has watched communities transform their relationship with shared resources and create flourishing where only struggle had existed. She has watched donors transform their relationship with their wealth and find, in genuine generosity, the meaning they had been seeking their entire lives. Money, Twist concludes, is not the problem. It is not the solution either. It is a current, a carrier of intention, and it will carry whatever we give it. The question is not how much of it you have. The question is what you are going to do with it, what you are going to let it say about who you are and what you believe and what you are committed to in this one particular, irreplaceable life you have been given. When you let your money move toward the things you actually care about, something opens. When you use what you have, whatever that is, in service of what genuinely matters, you step out of the story of scarcity and into the truth of sufficiency. And that, Lynne Twist promises, changes everything. Not because you suddenly have more, but because you suddenly realize, perhaps for the first time, that you already have enough.